In 2005, Mariah Carey released the best-selling album in America, and almost nobody saw it coming, least of all the people who'd spent 3 years writing her obituary. This is the record that pulled the woman Billboard had crowned Artist of the Decade for the 1990s back from a fall so public and so widely enjoyed that the industry had quietly agreed she was finished. To feel the size of the comeback, you have to sit with how far she'd fallen and with how many people were glad to watch it happen. For most of the 1990s, Mariah was untouchable. Billboard named her the Artist of the Decade. She had the sort of chart record that made her seem less like a pop star and more like a fixture of the industry itself. And there's something about that kind of dominance that makes people quietly long to see it end. Stay on top long enough, and your fall stops being a tragedy and it becomes entertainment. On September 11, 2001, the haters got their wish. She'd left Sony and the marriage to Tommy Mottola that had run alongside her entire early career and signed a $100 million deal with Virgin Records. Then came the breakdown. She posted a rambling, deeply personal message to her website, pulled out of appearances, and was admitted to hospital for what was described as physical and emotional exhaustion.
So basically all I really want to say is I don't know what's going on with life, and I hope all the fans are good, and I just want you to know that I'm trying to understand things in life right now, and so I really don't feel that I should be doing music right now. And I just want everyone to understand that. If I don't make music, it's not because I don't want to, for you fans. I'm not sounding defeated because I'm not defeated. I'm just going to do this for me. And I know that the people who care about me will care about me, but I just can't trust anybody anymore right now because I don't understand what's going on, because I'm not watching TV. I'm just literally trying to get out of this room.
Days later, her first feature film, Glitter, arrived, made on a reported $22 million budget, grossed barely $5 million at the box office, and was rabidly savaged by critics and moviegoers alike. The soundtrack, her 8th album, went with it. Within months, Virgin paid her $28 million to part ways with the company. She'd been one of the most bankable artists alive, and a major label decided it was cheaper to write her a check than to keep her. That's a very specific kind of public humiliation, and the press feasted on it. She regrouped the way she knew how, which was to retreat and write songs. She went to Capri and spent months writing. She signed to Island Records, started her own imprint, Monarch, and at the end of 2002 released Charm Bracelet, her first album since the whole Glitter debacle. And here's the part that matters for everything that follows. Charm Bracelet didn't connect. The reviews were tepid, the singles underperformed, and the read on her hardened into something close to consensus. The comeback had been attempted. It had failed, and she was done. And there's one thing I want to call out directly because it sits underneath all of this. To this day, people regularly type Payola in my comments about Mariah's 90s run. A claim that the empire was never really hers, that the only reason she racked up all those number ones was that she was married to Tommy Mottola and Sony was buying her the airplay. I always roll my eyes at comments like this, but the reflex tells you something because it's the same instinct as enjoying the fall from grace, just pointed backwards. The refusal to credit her for all that she achieved. If the success was bought, then losing it is only the market correcting, and there's nothing to mourn. Hold on to that, because the against all odds comeback she's about to make happens with no Mottola and no Sony machine behind her, which settles the Payola argument once and for all. The Emancipation of Mimi arrived with a reputation, the album where Mariah finally let her guard down, the private self on record at last. It's a great story, and it's also mostly a story. And separating the marketing from the music is the whole key to understanding what this record actually is. In 1997, Butterfly was her most personal album, and it genuinely was. And in 2002, she called Charm Bracelet her most personal album too. And that one was too. Slow, autobiographical ballads written in the immediate wake of the breakdown. It came out the same way Mimi would. Her own imprint, Monarch, full creative control, nobody steering the ship but her. And the framing was sincere. The songs really were confessional, and the public shrugged. By Mariah Carey's sales benchmarks, Charm Bracelet stalled. Odd. So when the intimacy angle came back around for Emancipation, it came back mostly as branding, as messaging. Mariah's inner circle called her Mimi, a nickname only close friends used. Not too dissimilar from Janet Demi to Joe Jackson, with a very different end to the story. When the Island executive L.A. Reid heard it, he pushed her to put it in the title. The pitch being that Mimi was the version of her the public had never seen, the one who could laugh at the diva jokes, the breakdown jokes, whatever anyone wanted to throw and just get on with living. She said herself in interviews that titling it The Emancipation of Mariah Carey would have been obnoxious, and that Mimi meant letting her guard down and inviting people closer in. Behold the record up against the marketing pitch, and it kind of falls apart. Count them. Butterfly in 1997, Charm Bracelet in 2002, now Mimi. 3 times she's reached for the intimacy framing. 3 albums sold on letting you in closer than usual. And the first 2 really meant it. Mimi doesn't. It doesn't open her up lyrically or thematically the way Butterfly did, and it's less confessional even than Charm Bracelet, the album that earned the tag for real and then flopped. There are no diary pages here. The album was, in her words, not about a bring-down-the-house tearjerker ballad or something steeped in the media dramas of my life. Letting My Guard Down is a story told around Mimi, not a description of what's actually inside it, and that's the whole irony of this era. The one time the framing was mostly marketing with very little real intimacy beneath it is the one the world, not just the Lamely, finally took to. So what actually got emancipated on the Emancipation of Mimi? Not her circumstances. She'd had creative control since Charm Bracelet, arguably since Glitter, even more so since Butterfly. It was her own judgment. By her own account, Charm Bracelet was the sound of a woman doing what she was told. Everyone was like, she needs to do those middle-of-the-road ballads. She needs to get back to that. So she did. A deliberate retreat to the simpler, ballad-led mode of her early 90s. Arguably, I would say closest to the Emotions album. And it sold over 1 million copies, which isn't terrible if you're not Mariah Carey. It still felt like a defeat against her own standard. Quote, I really started second-guessing myself, she said. Mimi is finally her ignoring all of that. She went with her gut, made a gorgeously crafted, thoroughly current R&B record with no thesis to prove, and told everyone with an opinion, the ones demanding ballads, the ones demanding she be vulnerable, in every interview to stay in their lane. Even she frames the era as a breath of fresh air, not a bearing of the soul. The freedom here is real. It's just creative, not confessional. The album opens with the line, I came to have a party. And you can hear that ease everywhere on this record. The compulsion to be #1 in every territory stops driving the album. The humor she'd kept off her records for years finally gets to resurface. The wardrobe alone tells you she's having fun again. The strange payoff with all that lightness is that it pulled in a younger audience. So the record taking shape across 2004 was a strong, classic-leaning Mariah album. A real R&B spine, lush balladry, and a singer relaxed inside her own catalog at last. It was going to be good. What it was not yet was Titanic. That took an accident and a flight to Atlanta. Here's the thing most people, even devoted fans, gloss right over. By late in the process, the album was close to done, and the conversation had moved to the part every campaign obsesses over. What's the lead single? And the songs in contention were not the songs you're thinking of. The candidates floating around the lead single conversation were tracks like To the Floor, featuring Nelly, and Say Something, the Pharrell and Chad Hugo Neptunes produced material, and the moody Kanye West produced Stay the Night. That was the shape of the comeback as it stood, sleek, of the moment, built around the producers du jour. Then the label made a suggestion that changed her career. Late in the process, they suggested she write with Jermaine Dupri. She went to Atlanta, and the two of them wrote Get Your Number and Shake It Off. And Shake It Off was so obviously a hit effortless, gliding chorus, one of the most relaxed vocals she's ever cut, that it became the presumed lead single. The album was getting its anchor late in the process, but it was getting one. But it still wasn't enough, because she went back to Atlanta after those initial sessions, back into the room with Dupri, and that's when they wrote It's Like That, and a little-known number you may or may not have heard of, We Belong Together. And here's the part that I love, because you couldn't have planned it if you tried. The album was effectively finished. The lead single was pretty much chosen, and then the two songs that would define the entire era, the brassy, confident statement of intent, and the ballad that became the biggest song of the decade, were written after all of that and slotted right at the front of the record. It's Like That became the actual lead single. We Belong Together became the second single and the juggernaut of the album. The most commercially perfect album of Mariah Carey's career got its two most important songs as a last-minute correction when most people would have called the thing done and released it. And I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make this sound colder than it was, like the label ran the numbers and Dupri was the formula. That's not how it happened at all. The real story is their friendship. Mariah and Jermaine go back years. Fantasy, Always Be My Baby, some of the defining records of her imperial run came out of that partnership. And let's not forget the remixes, where they really had the freedom. They have a shorthand most artists and producers never build. So when she needed a hit and went back to Atlanta, she wasn't reaching for a strategy. She was calling her friend, the one she'd made magic with before. And honestly, the only strange thing is that he wasn't her first call from the start. And what the two of them made when they got back in the room together was about to flatten everything in front of it. So let's talk about the record itself, because the singles run is genuinely one of the great ones. It's Like That sets the tone perfectly. Jermaine Dupri produced, brassy, loose, built on a flip of Run DMC and a nod to Doug E. Fresh and Slick Rick's La Di Da Di. It's Mariah announcing, before she sings a serious note, that she's here to have fun this time. And the video flows straight into We Belong Together, so the two singles read as one continuous story. In 2005, before the visual album was a format anyone talked about, that was a clever bit of packaging that made the comeback feel like an event rather than just a release. Then We Belong Together happened, and the word for what it did is domination. 14 weeks at number one, it nearly tied One Sweet Day for the longest run she'd ever had. It owned radio, owned weddings, owned breakups, and owned the year. Built on a sample of Bobby Womack's If You Think You're Lonely Now. It became the Mariah song for an entire new generation. The one a teenager in 2005 thought of as theirs, with no idea that she'd been doing this since 1990. I was living in a shared house that summer, and Mimi was a permanent fixture on the kitchen CD player. It was the soundtrack of that year, full stop. Shake It Off, the third single, should have been a chart topper in its own right. Slick, addictive, and an impossibly easy chorus. Mine Again is lush, sultry balladry, the kind of thing she can do in her sleep and most singers can't do at all. Stay the Night, produced by Kanye West, around a Betcha by Golly Wow sample. This is a deep crate sample album, wearing a glossy radio coat. Is dark and moody, and one of my personal highlights on the record. Get Your Number with Dupri is cheeky mid-2000s fun in the best sense, built on a sample of Imagination's Just an Illusion, with a hint of Steve Arrington's Weak at the Knees. And Say Something with Snoop is sleek. Pharrell's production gives it that Neptune's bounce. And the album closes on the spectacular Fly Like a Bird, a soaring gospel ballad that became a fixture of her live shows, and she performed it at the Grammys in 2006, and it was one of the moments where the room had to concede the obvious. She still got it. Terry Hatcher said it right.
Wow, that was amazing. I feel like we've all just been saved. Woo!
And a quick thing while we're inside the record. If the kind of close listening this video is doing is what you came here for, I do full, unedited first listen reactions over on the listening room on my Patreon. The unfiltered version in real time as I work through an album for the first time. The link's in the description below. Back to Mimi. Joyride sits in a warm, unbothered R&B groove that the single's size tends to drown out, and it's where the album's actual identity lives. None of this is accident or filler. It's a record built by people who knew exactly which corners of 70s soul and 90s R&B to pull from, and that lineage is a big part of why the thing feels so lived in rather than manufactured. Now, the numbers. And this is where you understand why this comeback gets talked about the way it does. It opened atop the Billboard 200 with 404,000 copies sold in its first week. The biggest opening she had to that point. Then it did the thing that almost no album does. In its 8th week, it returned to #1. Albums don't usually fight their way back to the top after the launch adrenaline wears off. This one did. On the strength of We Belong Together simply refusing to leave the radio. And here's the feat I promised you at the top. Shake It Off climbed to #2 on the Hot 100, and the only thing keeping it off the top was We Belong Together, Mariah's own single. She became the first woman in history to hold the top 2 positions of the chart simultaneously. She was so dominant in the summer of 2005 that the single blocking her from a #1 was also hers. That's the trivia. But here's why it's more than trivia. 3 years earlier, she'd been paid to leave a record label. 3 years earlier, the consensus was that she was finished. And now she was so far back in front that she was the only artist on the planet capable of stopping herself. There's something close to comedy in it, and then there's something close to vengeance. By the end of the year, the Emancipation of Mimi had sold around 4.97 million copies in America alone, making it the best-selling album of 2005. The first time since Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill in 1996, but the year's bestseller was a solo female record. Then the awards confirmed it. The album drew 10 Grammy nominations across 2 ceremonies, 8 of them in 2006 alone, a single-year record for her. It won Best Contemporary R&B Album, and We Belong Together took Best Female R&B Vocal Performance and Best R&B Song, with nominations stretching all the way up to Album, Record, and Song of the Year. And she still wasn't finished, because she added the P. What happened across 2005 and 2006 wasn't a comeback story in the ordinary sense. It was a resurrection, and it made Mariah Carey a bigger celebrity than she'd ever been, even at her imperial height. And here's the part that's easy to miss. In the 1990s, for all the #1s, Mariah really wasn't a pop star in the omnipresent sell you things sense. She was a hit machine, no doubt, but she was kept aloof and a little mysterious, and she had no need for a Pepsi check or a perfume line because the records made all the money, and Sony kept her behind glass. The resurrection changed that. For the first time, she became a full-blown commercial phenomenon, and the deals tell you exactly how completely the culture had taken her back. In 2006, she fronted a national campaign for Pepsi, writing and recording 20 original ringtones for their Cool Tones promotion with Motorola. Snippets and hooks of her own songs sold through a soft drink deal. Gave her an award for the celebrity legs of a goddess and unveiled a 16-foot statue of them. And the funniest part of that sentence is that in 2006, nobody blinked because that was simply the scale she was operating at. Even the late-night circuit bent the knee. She went back on Jay Leno, a show she'd publicly sworn off after he mocked her breakdown, because the moment was hers now, and everyone wanted in. And she looked the part, because the visual reinvention was every bit as deliberate as the music. The woman who'd hidden her figure entirely on the charm bracelet cover came back drenched in old Hollywood glamour. And the person guiding that was André Talley, a towering Vogue editor who served effectively as creative director for the Emancipation era. He put her in high fashion and high gloss and turned up beside her in the Say Something video, the two of them gliding through the Louis Vuitton flagship in Paris. The breathy, apologetic presentation of the previous two records was gone. This was a movie star who could sing, and she was shot like one. When Talley died in 2022, Mariah called him fashion's elegant giant and wrote that he was emancipated from the troubles of this world. She reached, without thinking, for the word that named the best year of her life.
I love a girl who will get up and exercise on a treadmill with stilettos and fishnet stockings.
So forget comeback. By 2006, she wasn't returning to the top. She was the top. 7.7 million copies sold worldwide, the soundtrack to the year, looking like a goddess, watching the same industry that had paid her to leave queue up to hand her its money. The fall had been total. The resurrection was bigger. And here's what I find almost impossible to believe now. The reviews at the time were lukewarm. Rolling Stone complained it lacked memorable songwriting and hooks, about an album with We Belong Together on it. And the Los Angeles Times called it a personal and liberating comeback, but argued it leaned too hard on standard contemporary R&B. And I want to read this part carefully, that it would fail to revitalize Carey's career. It produced the best-selling album of the year. It tied Elvis. It put her at 1 and 2 on the Hot 100 at the same time. The idea that it failed to revitalize her career is one of the great misreads in modern pop criticism. And it's worth holding up, not to dunk on the writer, but to make a point this channel keeps making. The contemporary review and the historical verdict are frequently not the same. The fans embraced Mimi instantly. They always understood what it was. The critical establishment took years to catch up. And now you'll struggle to find a serious retrospective that doesn't file it among her finest work. So let's get back to the people who are happy to see her fall. For a decade, she'd been so far ahead that her dominance felt less like success and more like the weather. And a lot of the satisfaction around Glitter and the breakdown came from watching the weather finally break. When Charm Bracelet underperformed, the verdict felt settled. She'd had her run. She wasn't coming back. And then she came back so hard that she ran the table on the entire industry and got the last laugh in the most pointed way possible. Because after Emancipation, she did it again. 3 years later, E = MC Squared opened with 463,000 copies, the biggest first week of her entire career, bigger even than Mimi. The comeback wasn't a fluke or a lightning strike. She rebuilt the throne and then proved she could refurnish it. Yes, the culture has since flattened her into the Christmas queen, the woman who defrosts once a year, and that's its own kind of disrespect for another video. But in 2005 and 2006, the woman the industry had paid to go away had the whole world at her feet again. And she'd done it on her own terms, under her own nickname, with a record she actually wanted to make. And I'll be honest about where I land on this album, because loving an artist means telling the truth about the work. Emancipation is, for me, an album I admire more than I love. And I say that as someone who'll defend her catalog to anyone. It's polished to a mirror finish, consistent top to bottom, engineered to be liked by absolutely everyone. And that's not a flaw so much as a description. It's the Mariah Carey album for the masses, and it did the mass appeal job better than almost any pop record of its decade. What it doesn't have, for me, is the wild experimentation of Rainbow or the emotional gut punch of Butterfly. Mimi needed help to get this big. L.A. Reid, the label's nudge, Dupri, the Neptunes, Snoop Dogg, Kanye, who was huge at the time, the right collaborators at the right moment. Her greatest records didn't need any of that. They were just her. That's the difference. And it's why I rank Mimi where I do. I admire how well it works more than I love it, if that makes sense. And you can check my Mariah Carey album ranking out on the channel. But here's the through line that makes Mimi arguably the most consequential album she ever released, even if it isn't her best, in my humble opinion. Listen to everything she put out afterwards, and you can hear her reaching back to this record's sound, trying to bottle it again, chasing the Emancipation template with diminishing returns, album after album. Caution is maybe the one real exception, the record that finally stopped trying to be Mimi too and took a daring new direction. Caution is hugely underrated, and I encourage you to listen to it right now, after you finish this video. Every other release lived in this one's shadow because this is the album that decided who R&B era Mariah was going to be. It didn't just save her career, it rewrote it, and then it set the terms for the rest of it. The comeback wasn't supposed to happen. 2 songs that powered it were written when the album was already considered finished. And the woman they paid to disappear ended up the only person on earth who could keep herself off the top of the chart. You just had to be there.
Okay, thank you. Love you. Bye.
Bye-bye.